Today, we want to talk about trends that can make or break your business in 2025. Trends, not fads, not hype, real strategic signals that demand your attention and action. Listener, stick with us to the end of this episode because at the end, we actually have a free resource that we're going to make available to you specifically to help you with this topic of trends. We've done a lot of the legwork to weed through so much of what's happening out there to help really narrow down to the ones that we're based on our own experience and based on the work we're doing with our existing client base. These are the ones that we think you need to be paying most attention to. Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO Podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm one of your co-hosts. You know that by now. This is episode number 92, and I'm here with my friend, my colleague, my foil, as I called her a little while ago, which sounds bad, but I mean it in the most lovable and appreciative way, Patsy Freeman. Patsy, welcome back. How are you?
I'm quite well today, thank you.
Good. So good to have you here. Listener, today we're actually tackling the topic of trends. By now, the purpose of this show is to address the issues keeping CEOs awake at night. And obviously, one of the things that keeps CEOs awake at night is trends, either the ones that you know about that are scary, the ones that you don't know about, and just the fact that you're not 100% locked in or tuned in, that can be disconcerting. But the challenge that I think leaders have today is just the rapid, first of all, the rapid pace of change. And then all the different ways that those trends come at you through social media, the regular media, that it just comes at you rapid fire and can be overwhelming. Today, we want to talk about trends that can make or break your business in 2025. Trends, not fads, not hype, real strategic signals that demand your attention and action. Patsy, I'll pause. You and I both work with organizations on strategic planning. We talk a lot about the importance of paying attention to trends, importance of then using those trends in the strategic planning process. Either capitalize on the ones that present opportunity or insulating yourself against the ones that provide a threat to the business. But before we hit record, you were talking about how trend spotting, as we've been calling it, it's a different muscle for CEOs. Talk a little bit more about that.
It is a different muscle. It is a muscle that causes us to look outside the business or, take an overview of the business, both from the inside and the outside, but it's not working in the business necessarily so much. So I think it does require a different vantage point. And for many CEOs, especially today, as stuff's coming at us rapid fire, we're so focused on our operations that we forget to step aside and take a strategic view, which trend spotting is.
The trap of spending too much time working in the business versus on the business. I think that's one of the reasons why when we do strategic planning and also the rhythmic check-in to keep your strategic execution on track. For me, the logistics piece is so helpful, getting people off-site, getting them out of the conference room on site, because everything within the confines of the actual physical business just seems to lend itself to operations, the tactical and not the strategic. And there's not a lot of conversation about trends. Maybe, I don't know, maybe an occasional conversation, but there's really not a deep dive or a deep analysis into trends unless you're forced to have that conversation and get away.
And I don't know about you, but so many, I think, of our clients end up in a reactive mode when stuff happens to them because they haven't been proactive in looking at what's coming down the pike. So then they're caught totally off guard. So the amount of time, energy, and money, other resources, to deal reactively with something when you could have spotted it earlier on in the process is a huge competitive advantage, not to mention a resource saver.
they just come at you in waves. Every day there's something new, there's new technology, new competitors, even the shifts in the economy, the shifts in the political landscape. There's just so much that happens, and everything makes you question your strategy, makes you wonder if you have the right people, impacts profitability. You've already alluded to, if you're not paying attention, the danger is you fall behind, right? Your business falls behind because you missed a shift in behavior, consumer behavior, or regulatory policy. But as I said, they don't all exist. They don't all matter equally. So, Patsy, talk about what is the risk of treating all trends as equally important?
Well, as we know, probably in our professional and personal lives, when everything's equally important, and you've got, there's 21 trends on this that we've identified if people head into Q3, then you get overwhelmed. So then you get discouraged. So then you don't do anything. So just as we talk about strategic planning, or strategic planning is the art of exclusion, identifying what top 2, 3, maybe 4 trends are going to have the biggest impact on your business is strategically smart and resource smart.
Yeah, say that again. Strategic planning. Talk about that.
Exclusion is the art of strategic planning. None of us can do. None of us can. I can't even juggle 2 balls at the same time. But people that are really proficient jugglers can't do much more than 3 or 4. So it's just smart to focus on the top 3 or 4 most important things for your business, for your people at this point in time.
It's a great reminder, because the amount of trends out there, the sheer volume of them, that alone can just be overwhelming, right? You said it, right? There's so much coming at me that I freeze. There's so much at me that I can't figure out which one to do first. So I'll just go back to what I know, which is often the tactical, the operational, and not paying attention to what's coming. And so the art of exclusion, being able to throw it all up there, and recognize, as we've been saying lately, I stole this from one of my clients. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. So working with your team, working with your people to narrow down all the trends that are out there, and figure out which of the 2 or 3, as you said, 2, 3, 4 that are most relevant to our business. And there are 2 lenses to look at that through. One is what presents great opportunity to us, that we can capitalize on, and what presents a potential threat to who we are and what we do, who we're trying to serve, the products that we have, and what do we need to do now to insulate ourselves. And the rest, by narrowing it down to those top 2, 3, 4, it just makes it maybe creates some bite-sized chunks instead of feeling like you're drinking from the fire hose.
And you also mentioned something really important, is who should be watching the trends. You mentioned your teams and your senior teams, people throughout your organization. It's often, so the CEO, if you're listening, it's often easy to think, oh, this is only my responsibility. But you only have one lens. It's an important lens, but there are key people in your organization that have different lenses. So we're getting eventually your whole organization, or at least key people in your organization, to be spotting trends is also a really smart strategic thing to do, because then you get a lot of viewpoints.
I'm going to take a moment to, I don't know if it's embarrass you or just affirm you. You are an exceptional coach. You're listener, if you're not familiar, Patsy's a fantastic coach. And that's not me saying that. That's Patsy's, her clients say that. So you work with senior leaders. How do you help them? How do you either help them build the muscle of trend spotting themselves, or, to your point a moment ago, engage it's probably yes and. How do you do that? And how do you help them engage their teams in the process of trend spotting? You just talked about how important it is. So let's get practical. How do they do it?
Well, it is a willingness, it's an awareness that we have to step out of the daily operations of the business, first of all. That is and put yourself in a place, paused long enough to say, let me think strategically. So let me look at the big picture. Let me look at this from a bird's eye view. Let me put myself in a place where I can actually look, on the business. So that's one thing. The other is curiosity. How do I be curious? How do I ask questions? It's really, especially when we're in a reactive mood, curiosity is not in big supply. So how do I stay curious? How do I look at my business and see what seems off or what seems on in a way that I want to do more or less of that? So having that kind of discerning eye on your business. Also is to engage, to stay engaged both with people outside your business. What are you seeing? What are you seeing in our industry? Ask questions. Part of being curious, but ask questions and engage. A lot of people we know will engage with their frontline workers. What are you seeing? How's this working? What we could do more of, what could we not do less of? So those are 3 or 4 characteristics. And then when you do find yourself in a reactive mode, so you're reacting to something, once you've gotten through that period, stop and evaluate. How did we miss this? What did we need to see? What did we learn from this? I heard a comment the other day. Somebody said, failures are part of success. And it just brought me up short. But if we learn from our failures so that we're actually using that learning to get us back on track, then failures are part of our success. When you find yourself in a reactive place, learn from that. Get yourself back on track.
I had several thoughts as you were talking. First, we've had Mark Williams, the CEO of Brokers International, on a couple of times, and he specifically says if you're not failing, you're not trying, right? If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying. That's one thought, just to reinforce what you just said. I also think, and there are some real examples of leaders that I've worked with. I know you have similar examples who've done what you just talked about a minute ago, of being curious. The word that came to mind too is being humble enough to admit I don't have all the answers. And I mean, I feel like that's a big part of trend spotting, is just to acknowledge there's so much, and some of this happens just as we get older. I think like when we're younger and we think we know everything, and the more we age, the more wisdom and experience comes, the more you realize I don't know anything. I feel like some days I'm just scratching the surface at understanding what's out there to be known. And so there's humility to admit that you don't have all the answers, which sounds easy, but as a CEO, I meet more CEOs who just feel like they're supposed to have all the answers. They believe that they're supposed to always have something smart to say, always have the finger on the pulse of what's happening. And that's A, tremendous pressure, and B, I almost feel like it's rooted in, I don't know what it's rooted in. It's not what's needed today. If you really want to be open to what's happening out there, you have to be willing to say, I don't know. And I can think of 2 leaders in particular that I've worked with who did what you talked about, where they literally pulled their teams together and with no agenda. Again, that's risky. Like you go as a CEO, you go in, you're like, I have no agenda. I'm not leading this meeting. I'm just here to ask questions and listen and learn. If our partner Leb Tannenbaum was here, he'd talk about checking your assumptions at the door. Just assume you know nothing, and asking your people, what's going on out there that I don't know about? What's going on out there? Like, what do you see that I need to know about? And then just listening.
Well said. I think there's another piece here that's really important in being aware of what can I control and what can't I control. Right now, the government and regulatory world is shifting at the blink of an eye. We can't control that. It's an example of what we can't control. On the other hand, the number of people in various generations in the workplace is changing as well. We can be aware of that. We can control how we create our culture, our environment, so that we support people regardless of what generation they're in. So that's something that we can control. But if we're trying to control something that we really can't control, that's a lesson in futility.
There, the word is the word for me is resilience. It's we always talk about wanting to be resilient and resilient organizations. I think that's understanding. It's as much about building a culture of listening, paying attention to, and responding to trends as it is trying to control them. Like it's well, like you said, so much of it you can't control, but you are responsible for what you what you do with it, right? How you respond to whatever the shifting in the landscape actually is. I want to reiterate, listeners, stick with us to the end because we've got a free resource that you will be able to download with. We've done a lot of the work to identify, Patsy alluded to it earlier, 21 trends critical trends that are happening right now that you ought to be aware of and paying attention to. But also to what Patsy said earlier, please don't feel like you have to have a plan or a strategy to respond to all 21 because that's overwhelming. The idea is to go through the resource, figure out which ones are the most relevant and impactful to you, and then create a strategy around it. So, Patsy, we're just talking about who should be paying attention to trends and how often, for sure, a CEO needs to be, that's a core competency, right? You've said that before, that trend spotting is a core competency for every CEO. But how do you build, and we just talked about one example, like pulling the team together. How do you build a culture from your experience? How would you build what would you suggest the CEO do to begin to build a culture of trend spotting so that the CEO doesn't need to be the only one paying attention to what's happening?
Well, a lot of these characteristics of trend spotting that you and I both have just talked about can be built into your culture. You can build teams where you teach people to. Done a number of this in leadership programs where you teach people to think like an owner. You teach people to think strategically, especially your senior executives, but anyone in your organization. Curiosity and empathy are two characteristics that certainly I see more and more the workforce is asking for more of or wants to learn more of. And teach people to be curious. But as a CEO and senior team, you have to be willing to meet people, that are bringing those characteristics to the table. Developing your senior team, or certainly the people that manage those people, it's just incorporating it into the whole organization. And we'd call that a learning organization, I think.
Okay. Again, something else that I genuinely know you excel at is building those learning organizations. You've done a lot of work with first-time managers, right? First-time leaders, and helping them understand the difference, right, between being an individual contributor and now it's a different set of skills. Now you're leading others, right? Lead yourself first, then lead others. When you are working with a leader, and I'm asking this on behalf of the listener, on behalf of our CEO listener, or our frustrated senior leader, who's thinking, okay, I will try to help my people think more strategically, because I just heard that on this podcast. Patsy, how do you help new managers understand the difference between strategic and tactical? And how would you advise a CEO to coach or mentor her or his leaders to think more strategically?
I think it's important to understand that when you start out in the workforce, you're starting out doing the work. And as you move up through the organization, you need different skills. We often forget that because somebody's promoted, they automatically have the skills to do whatever they're being asked to do at that level of the organization. I personally don't think strategic thinking is needed until you get into a team leader or executive level, because you're not working on the business, you're continuing to work in the business. I also think, at least from my experience, that only about 20-25% of the population, regardless of what your role is, have a natural ability to think strategically. It's just not how we're wired. So there's it's not how, a lot of those people that aren't in that 25% end up being CEOs. So a lot of what we're talking about here doesn't come natural to people leading the company. So just making the distinction between working in the business, the skills you need there, which is usually what managers bring, project managers, leaders, is a different skill set. It's just a different view of the world. And we have to be aware of that as we're developing our culture, our people, that we have to teach people those skills, and we have to teach them the value of looking at the business from that perspective, at that place in the organization. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Again, what comes to mind, to your point, since perhaps a significant part of the organization, the majority of my organization, may not either need to know the difference between thinking strategically and operating tactically, or may just not have that natural bent, that natural inclination. Still, how do I elicit from everybody in my organization the trends, what they're seeing, that is that's relevant, that's important, and I think I go back to, it's just gathering data. It's like solving any problem.
Yep.
The more data I have, the more likely I am to I don't say solve correctly, but at least put a good response together to whatever the issue is. And I think about how many leaders rule from the ivory tower. How many executive teams. It's what's coming to mind is, again, some of the leaders that we've worked with who talk about managing by walking around, right? Just going out and meeting the people where they work, and literally, like, instead of blowing past the reception desk as you walk in, actually stopping and saying, "Hey, what are you seeing that we need to know about?" It's getting closer to your people, meeting them where they are, engaging them in conversations that give them an opportunity to share what they're seeing, and then just listening, not trying to solve or shut anything down or respond. And one of my favorite sayings for leaders to use is, "Thank you for telling me that. What else? Thank you for telling me that. What else?" Right? Just opens the door for more, instead of trying to feel like you have to have something smart to say, or you have to be able to respond back to the conversation. It's just about listening, gathering data.
And I'd say a lot of what you're talking about, and many of the characteristics we talk about in being a trend spotter, is really about creating a culture, a learning culture, an open culture, an intentional culture. You can teach people to be curious no matter what their role in the organization. You can teach them to ask good questions, you can teach them to be a good listener. You can teach them to honor differences, harness differences, be curious about, why do you think that? You think different than me. Certainly you and I, Patrick, approach things from a very different perspective, but because we know that what our common ground is so much more richer, what we get to in the middle is so much more valuable than either of our perspectives alone. So you can foster all these things in your culture, so that when you do ask people these questions about what do you see, where do you see problems, they feel like you genuinely want their opinions.
Yeah.
And they can genuinely give those.
I agree. Which then leads to maybe kind of a last place to park in this episode is, how do you filter through the noise? Right? We talked about, even we're offering at the end of this episode, or as part of this episode, we're offering a Q3 2025 trends list. But how do you know which ones should we pay attention to, and which ones, should we just worry about, or I say worry about later, or ignore altogether? So do you have any suggestions or criteria, Patsy, for how do you advise a leader to know if a trend is worth responding to, or if it's something that needs to go on the back burner or filtered out altogether?
Well, I'd circle back to what you're talking about in terms of your strategic initiatives. So if you CEO have a strategic plan, or at least have strategic initiatives, you've already taken the time to identify what are your highest priorities for a time period. So that's giving you a north arrow, so to speak. So that would be one thing. Which trends are going to impact those key initiatives? Then you're going to have what values, what is your culture? There are trends that could affect those. So again, it's filtering out which trends are going to have the biggest impact on your organization, both from a employee morale, from a operational efficiency, and from a revenue perspective.
I think that's great, and you're right. And it's always a good reminder, and we remind leaders this when we're in the room with them, helping to create or update their strategic plan, like their list of the strategic initiatives that you were just referencing. We're quick to remind them that a strategic plan is often outdated within a few months, right? And it doesn't mean you deviate from it altogether. It means there's, especially today, at the rate that information is changing, there's more data, there's more information. And so it doesn't mean throw it out, but it does. I love how you said that your strategic initiatives, in essence, your strategic plan can help you filter through the list of all possible trends to figure out which ones are ones that impact where we're trying to go, maybe accelerate where we're trying to go, or perhaps provide roadblocks that may either need to be overcome or maybe change the direction, maybe change the course of where we're trying to go.
I mean, we see typically, so hopefully everybody listening to this podcast are executing on your strategic initiatives on a regular basis.
Yep.
And one key question, at least quarterly, that you should be asking yourselves is, what are the new trends that we're seeing? What is the new impact happening to our organization that we need to be aware of, that maybe it's going to cause a course correction in where we thought we were going, because the landscape doesn't look, just in a short 3-month period, doesn't look the same as it did 3 months ago.
Yeah, I'm before we recorded, we were talking about how clearly a major trend and a disruptor to practically every industry is AI. And so plans that were built at the end of 2025, at the end of 2024 for 2025 should already be impacted by or adjusted by the possibilities of artificial intelligence. And so it's having those. We like to do monthly strategy execution meetings, right, where you're pulling the team together to make sure you're staying on track executing. But in that quarterly review of the plan, it's a great point. Okay, is there a new trend that impacts, again, that either provides an opportunity for us or is a threat to where we're trying to go and what we're trying to accomplish, or are any of the trends that we've talked about previously and perhaps put on the back burner, perhaps put on the watch list, have they changed enough that they now become an opportunity or a threat to what we're trying to accomplish? So it's you don't have to revisit that conversation from scratch every quarter. Like, okay, what are all the trends out there? It's what's our running list of trends? How are we doing at responding to the ones that are important to us in one shape or another, and have some dropped off? They're no longer important to us, and do new ones need to be added?
And I will reinforce that this is a muscle. This is an organizational muscle that needs to be built, just like other kind of key components of your business, is learning to take a different perspective, both internally and externally.
Well, we have a trend on the Frustrated CEO podcast where we end every episode with a what we call the Let's Get Practical, something specific and actionable that we want to give you, our listener, so that you can do something. Because the ROI doesn't come from listening; the ROI comes from actually doing something. Now, I'll say this: the first thing that you can do is, we've teased this a little bit. Let's actually go ahead and give the address. So we have done the work for you. We've tried to filter through a lot of the noise. We've done the work, and we have put together a downloadable PDF of 21 trends that are impacting businesses in 2025, but specifically, as we're recording this in the second quarter of 2025, so that you can bring this with you to your quarterly review of your strategic plan. And if you don't have that meeting already scheduled, schedule it. If you don't have a strategic plan, pull your executive team together and look and read through the trends. We've categorized them, and with each one, we've given you a suggested strategy, just one strategy that you might consider in response to that trend. Remembering first step is to narrow it down. Can't do all 21, but narrow it down. You can find this at, go ahead and write this down, or just type it out on your browser as I'm giving it. You can find this trends document for Q3 2025 at thelionsgroupconsulting.com/trends. So again, www.thelionsgroup, and that's LYONS, thelionsgroupconsulting.com/trends. Go ahead and download that now. And while you're doing that, actually, we can start to, we can, as I love to say, it's such a sports analogy, round third and head home with our let's get practical. I love how you always, Patsy, you always kind of like shake your head like, I don't like that analogy. You have to give me another one so I can use it next time. So, okay, let's get practical. What do you got? You want to go first?
First thing is, trend spotting is a core competency for any organization, but especially senior leaders. And it is a practice. It can be learned and it can be taught. Another thing is to use the distinction what's within your control and not within your control as a filter determination. And the other, which is develop your own resiliency as a leader. You're going to hear things as you start to learn to spot more trends, and your own reaction is going to be the first place where resiliency is going to be needed. So then you can build trend spotting into your senior team and other parts of the organization. I'll let you add.
All right, I got a couple. You led the episode off with the importance of stepping out of the day-to-day, the working in the business long enough to be able to evaluate the trends, right? That's where you're going to find the time to evaluate what's happening, what opportunities does it present to us, and what threats does it create for us, is getting out of the day-to-day, stepping out of it long enough to work on the business. You've heard this, listener, you've heard this ad nauseum from us. You've heard it from, the step, like work on the business, not in the business. Well, that is entirely up to you. You got to make the time. I love the point you made earlier, Patsy, about being curious, right? Just asking what's working, what's not working. Ask questions of yourself, ask questions of your people, ask questions of your customers, but just be curious. Be a lifelong learner and listen and ask questions. And then maybe the last one I'll add is earlier, where we sort of landed, is that your strategic priorities, your strategic initiatives can be a very valuable filter in helping you sort through all the possible trends that are out there. Like, okay, so if this is where we're going, what presents a threat or an opportunity to our revenue, to our employee morale, to our operations, to our to our existing base within the next 6 to 12 months. And maybe that helps you filter through the noise and figure out which ones are the ones you have to pay attention to. What would you add?
Trend spotting, as in strategic initiatives, is the art of exclusion. Mm-hmm. So only focus on those. It's really a compliment to what you're just saying, but only focus on those few that are going to have the greatest impact on where you want to go.
Beautiful. I only have one more Let's Get Practical to add, and that is, it's very practical. Go to thelionsgroupconsulting.com/trends and download our Q3 trends that your business ought to be aware of and work with it. Download it, sort through it, do the art of exclusion, and start crossing things off until you come up with the 2, 3, or 4 that you think are most impactful. It's easy, it's free. And then, as I said, for each one, we put on there a strategy that you can implement on your own. Now, if you would like any help with any of that, this is what we do. We would love to have a conversation with you to see how we might advise you, how we might support you in the process of creating responses to the trends that keep you awake at night, so that we're not just creating a podcast to address those issues, but that we're happy to help you take steps to alleviate and resolve those issues so that you can sleep better at night. That's the goal.
In other words, be proactive, not reactive.
That's probably it's a great way to end a Let's Get Practical. Patsy, thank you so much for participating in an important conversation today about trends. It's always great to see you. All right, listener, that's the only call to action I'm going to leave you with today, is to go to thelionsgroupconsulting.com right now, /trends. Go there right now, download our trends list, and then let us know. Let us know what you think, if it was helpful, how you might want to see that changed or improved in the future. And then by all means, if we can support you, I'd love to connect. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sticking with us to the end of another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. We'll see you next time.